Hey guys, Victor here, and today we're going to be doing something different as I want to focus on what you should be citing for this upcoming national season, or, if you're good enough, eventually making it to the World Championship qualifier, where you will in turn have a chance to earn your invite to Worlds, which is pretty much, every single Yu-Gi-Oh player's dream at this point, right? Who doesn't want to go to Worlds at least once? So, with that in mind, let's just talk about the format really briefly. Unfortunately, when it comes to citing, it's going to be incredibly difficult just because of how diverse the format actually is. And because of that, I've pretty much opted to just focus on 5 main decks for this video, being Sprite, Kashtira, Labyrinth, Branded, and Vanquish Soul, as I feel like those are going to be the ones that take up the majority of the slots, or what you're going to see more often. But there are still a lot of other really incredible decks that you need to be on, just constantly on the lookout for, such as like Sword Soul, Punk Pride, Dark World, even Sky Striker, right? Sky Striker's just got a lot of new support back from the Forbidden and Limited list, and it's literally a fan favorite deck that you pretty much always see no matter what type of tournament you want to enter, just because it has so many diehard fans. So with that in mind, let's just jump straight into the video. Alright, so the first deck that I want to focus on is actually Sprite, which, as many of you know, is pretty much like an entire strategy focused on swarming the field with as many monsters as possible and then setting a couple back row in order to pretty much just negate everything that your opponent attempts to do. And they can do it pretty consistently thanks to cards like Sprite Red, Sprite Carrot, Double Smashers, Sprite Double Cross, and especially the Runic variant, which combines, Runic Fountain with it, which pretty much means that they have just a million billion interruptions. So a lot of the decks, or a lot of the cards that you typically would side, especially like hand traps, for example, are just not very effective against this deck. And it's honestly just really resilient to the point where it can play through so many things. So with that in mind, I feel like the best option for siding for Sprite would be playing Board Breakers. And we're going to be starting off with Lava Golem. So whether it's Lava Golem or it's Raw Sphere mode, they're both incredibly impactful because that deck will always have 2 monsters on field at minimum. So if you're able to Lava Golem or Sphere mode, just being able to take away a bunch of all those key resources, which in turn turns off a lot of their own cards, because if they don't have like a Link monster, for example, or an Xyz monster, they're not going to be able to use their Sprite Double Cross. They're going to need a Sprite on field, I believe, if they want to activate their Sprite Smashers. And, just getting rid of Red, Carrot, whatever, is just, it's extremely valuable. The only difficult part comes from the fact that, as I stated, the most popular version is unfortunately paired with cards such as Runic, which just adds a completely different dimension, because on top of the Sprite boards and the generic Sprite cards that you always have to deal with, you now have to deal with the entire Runic engine, just banishing your cards, popping your cards, negating your stuff, drawing 3. Yeah, it's just not a fun time. But Lava Golem and Sphere mode are a great way to get you there. And then after that, we're going to be playing, or talking about the one Nibiru, the Primal Being. So the fact of the matter is, Sprite players do not respect this card anymore, as they're constantly going for Sprite Sprint to send Angler special summon 2 Beavers, and then by that point they finally get to the Gigantic. And when they try to Gigantic, if you Nibiru them, you contribute the Gigantic, they won't be able to special summon anything else. All they have is a Nibiru token that they can't do anything with. And it's honestly just a really impactful card in that matchup that just helps you so much. Obviously, if your opponent plays like Sprite or Red, they will attempt to, try to keep that on the field just to ensure that Nibiru doesn't resolve. But a lot of the times they don't. They just go for the Gigantic play after they've already summoned 5 monsters. And if you have the Nibiru, a lot of the times that can just win you the game. So I would definitely recommend playing Nibiru if Sprite becomes more popular. But a good Sprite player will be playing around it, obviously. But a lot of them do not. So yeah, Nibiru, ultimate scrub killer. And then for the final one, we're going to be playing, or talking about, Dark Ruler No More. So that deck, depending on like any variant, it doesn't matter whether it's Live Twin, Melfi, Pure, whatever, they always have a bunch of monsters. And Dark Ruler No More is honestly just an insane card because, as it states, you negate the effects of all monsters your opponent controls that are face up. So just being able to slap down a Dark Ruler No More and then having to only worry about the spells and traps can sometimes just win you the game straight up, because a lot of the difficulty with dealing with the sprites is, dealing with the monster effects on top of the spells and traps. But if you're able to just effectively eliminate the monster effects, the game becomes so much easier, and just, yeah, a lot of the times you can play through their boards. So with that, that's the Sprite. Sprite talk. And now we can move on to the next deck. All right, so the next deck I want to be talking about is Kashtira, which is basically at this point a Rise Heart Turbo, which is incredibly, it's fairly easy to deal with compared to the other stuff that they were doing, because now you know for sure that all they can really do is a Rise Heart you, as opposed to, zone locking you for 10 if their hand is like super broken or just, you know, being ignorant. And thanks to the ban of number 89 Arise or number 89 Diablosis, that means you're no longer losing half your deck by the time your turn starts. So you should be able to get to your answers fairly consistently and just be able to, you know, win the game, you know, not terribly difficultly, because the deck is still really good, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot more easy to handle thanks to, you know, the fact that we actually know how their opponent is going to be able to play. So with that in mind, we're going to be starting off with kaijus, not just Radiant, I mean literally any kaiju. The preferred kaiju is probably going to be Gamma Seal, if I'm being honest, just because they can't really do anything with it since it's a level 8, I believe. And, you know, every Kashtira monster is a level 7, so they're pretty much just anti-synergy. Not much to say. If the deck goes a Rise Heart Turbo Pass, Kaiju's literally out their entire board, so unless they have Dimension Shifter, you will be able to play the game properly. And then after that, if they want to floodgate us, we can floodgate them back thanks to cards like Artifact Lancia. So if you're really scared of Kashtira, this card is actually fantastic at helping you deal with that matchup. You just, the moment you draw it during your opponent's turn, you just automatically use it because it helps you just, you know, prevent so many of their key cards. So thanks to Lancia, they cannot summon their Kashtira Rise Heart, which means they're not going to be able to banish 3 of your cards face down. They're not going to be able to special summon Kashtira Scareclaw. They can't use cards such as Pot of Prosperity, so that essentially becomes a brick in their hand that they can't do anything with. And unless their hand is incredibly powerful or like really good, they're not going to be able to even summon a Rise Heart a lot of the time. They pretty much at most can only go Kashtira Fenrir, Kashtira Unicorn Pass, which, you know, sometimes is a pain to deal with depending on the hand you draw, but compared to, you know, like a Rise Heart set, whatever, it's way more manageable to deal with just Fenrir Unicorn Pass. So yeah, with that, that's the Kashtira portion, and now we can move on to Branded next. Now, Branded as a deck, as you may know, just lost Branded Expulsion, so the Gimmick Puppet lock, while it's still available, is a lot more easily interactable with, as their only way to do it is through the Albion fusion, which requires them to have the card in the grave. So with that, we're going to be playing Bestials for that, because the Gimmick Puppet just happens to be a dark, and if you banish it, you know, you're not getting Gimmick Puppet locked. So a lot of the time, like they invest a lot of their resources to try and Gimmick Puppet lock you, and then if they can't get the lock going, the deck just, you know, does crumble, and it's already a really fragile deck just because of the fact that, you know, one Ash Blossom on Branded Fusion can straight up just end their turn a lot of the time. But if you hold the Bestial for their, you know, trying to lock you out with their Gimmick Puppet, it's such an uphill battle for them that it's yeah, like that deck is just rough because there's so many cards you can side for that matchup to just make it super easy. But this is mainly, you can play going first or going second, but if you go first, these 2 next cards just straight up win you the game. The first one being Anti-Spell Fragrance. If they can't play their spells, they can't play the game. Simple as that. And that deck definitely needs its spells because Branded Fusion is a really important card. But thanks to this, they don't get their Branded Fusion. I think they might be able to get to Branded Loss if they have the Lubellion, but I'm not sure if that activates it from the deck or like just places it from the deck. It's like, it's something that you'll have to, like, you know, be on the lookout for. But if they don't get to Branded Fusion, it doesn't matter because they're not winning the game. And then for the same reason, we play the one-dimensional barrier, as you just call fusions and it's a wrap. They literally just don't do anything. That entire deck revolves around nothing but fusion summons. So yeah, sometimes, you know, they'll be desperate and they'll play like Crossout Designator, but it very rarely happens. So if you can, yeah, you know, the 1D barrier, if you go first, it's a wrap. Along with the Ash Blossom too, yeah. The deck literally does not matter. And with that, that's the Branded matchup. And next, we're going to move on to Labyrinth. Now, when it comes to Labyrinth, this deck is a little bit trickier to side against because there's 2 specific versions that people are playing, which are the Furniture build and, you know, the Floodgate Turbo build. So, obviously, you don't know which one you're going to play against for game 1, which is fine because you're not siding game 1. But for games 2 and 3, a lot of the cards that you do play, typically, you know, like you want to side in for this matchup, especially against the Furniture build, are just worthless because of the fact that you will be getting Eradicator. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're going to get Eradicator, they're going to call spells and traps, and you're just going to have a bad time. So, with that in mind, I decided to play Cosmic Cyclone for this matchup because you want your cards to be chainable, and if you're able to get rid of your opponent's cards or back row just, you know, easily, especially if it's like a Welcome Labyrinth or a big Welcome Labyrinth, for example, being able to banish that card out of the, you know, from the field with Cosmic Cyclone and making sure that it's not able to reset itself goes a long way in helping them hurt their grind game. But yeah, there isn't really like a lot of counterplay that you can do for the Labyrinth or for the furniture version, just because they typically only end on like 2 sets, 2 maybe 3 sets, along with just a bunch of big beefy monsters on the field. They're 3K attack, and then they can set another trap and they become untargetable, and yeah, it gets really bad. So like siding isn't really effective against this deck. You just have to rely on your main deck for the most part, but Cyclone does help you get there. So just having anything chainable to get rid of their back row is huge. And if you want, you could probably play Twin Twister as well. It's just sometimes you'll see them play like Heavenly Seal or Heavenly Lord, which is the 3K guy that reveals itself and you can't destroy set cards. So I just go with Cosmic just because it's easy, it banishes, it's a quick play, so you can chain it to Eradicator, and yeah, card's just solid. But if you're playing against the trap heavy deck or trap heavy version of it, another card you can play is Denko Sekka. This card is literally open judgment or lose, because if they don't have the judgment and you Denko them, they literally just cannot play. So yeah, like this card is just insane against the deck, and even against like the furniture build to like an extent, right? So you know that they're going to be able to like Eradicator you, and you know that you're going to have full knowledge of their hand. So if they see the Denko in your hand, they're going to force out their welcome before they actually want to, which means that basically you don't really have to worry about like the additional effects from the big guys that come out. You can just worry about like the actually outing the monsters, just because Denko is such an ever-present like threat to that deck. But for the most part, I don't really think you can really side all that much against that deck. Obviously, if you go first, even if you go first, like these cards are still really effective against it. So with that, that's the Labyrinth matchup, and now we can finally move on to Vanquish Soul. All right, so I wanted to say Vanquish Soul for last because it's the newest deck that just recently came out, so that means more people are going to be unfamiliar with this compared to the other stuff. But from what I've seen, the deck is actually really cool with what it can do. However, it does have some very glaring weaknesses that can be exploited, and the first one is, unfortunately for them, they need to draw and search a lot in order to actually function. So because of that, Draw and Lockbird is actually really fantastic against that deck, and it just completely shuts them down and prevents them from playing the game, because depending on which one they start with, if they start with the draw, that means they're basically just going to be relying on luck and praying that their opening hand was good enough to actually play. But a lot of the times it's just straight up not, if I'm being honest. And with the draw-in effect, their end boards just become really mediocre, if I'm being honest. So yeah, I definitely consider this if Vanquish Soul ends up becoming like a top tier threat that you have to play against. And for the same reason, I think you should try out Mistaken Arrest. So this is for when you're going first and if you don't want to feel like getting hit by cards such as Triple Tactic Talent, for example, just because while this doesn't prevent drawing until the end of the next turn, neither player can search. And searching is just as important as drawing in this deck, especially because even though you do, draw a decent amount, you need your specific searches in order to, actually effectively play the game, because you don't really want to rely on blind luck drawing you what you need if you want to try like win. But it's not as great, but it's still really effective. And then for the final card, I want to talk about Book of Eclipse. So this card is honestly just really insane against this deck, because first off, the big monsters for Vanquish Soul, they can only summon themselves during the main phase. So during your draw phase or your standby phase, you can just activate Book of Eclipse, flip everything face down, and then you basically turn off all the cards in their hand. However, just be aware they do have a quick play Reborn that can, play around this. So what you should be doing is you should be forcing out the Reborn, and then after you force that out, you go Book of Eclipse again, and even though they can tag themselves out, you're still going to be flipping the monsters that they summon face down, which means they're not going to be able to get their effects, and that deck just folds, I guess, if they don't have anything with that. They literally have to rely on their hand traps in order to function at that point, or floodgates, because some of them do play there can be only one. So yeah, I think this card is honestly going to be really good, and if Vanquish Soul does become really good, I would not be surprised if this card makes its way back into the main deck or the side deck. So with that, that's the siding video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!